I want to go right into the Word on this morning. I'm going to be in the book of Genesis. I'm going to talk about the story of Joseph. And I want to share with you something God gave me earlier in the week about destiny. Amen. I'm going to start with the 37th chapter of Genesis on this morning. And I want to talk about destiny. Excuse me one second. Destiny. I want to talk about your destiny. My destiny, your destiny, our destiny, but most importantly, what God's destiny is for your life. Okay? Destiny. Look at your name and say destiny. Destiny is often a word that we use a little more lightly than the true meaning, I believe. Even the way we speak it in the English language. I want to first define the word destiny. But there's two words I want to define. I want to define purpose and destiny. You see, sometimes we can be operating in our purpose and we end up staying there, quite honestly. We can get stuck in our purpose for years, decades, or even a lifetime, never actually realizing our divine destiny. So, two words: purpose, destiny. Purpose, destiny. Look to your left and say purpose. And look to your right and say destiny. Let me give you an example. Near the beginning of the book of Genesis, the Bible speaks about Adam and Eve being in the garden. God told Adam and Eve to be fruitful and multiply. So the divine purpose of Eve would to be the mother of all mankind. That was her purpose, to bear children and to multiply. She was already operating in her destiny, and that was to rule with Adam in dominion of the garden. They were originally created to be eternal beings and have everything that they could want and need at their fingertips. In one defiant act, the very thing that God told her not to do or told them not to do, she did, thus causing the curse, removing her from her destiny, but thrusting her into her purpose. She was still utilized for her purpose, but did not operate in her destiny. Purpose. Destiny. Look at your neighbor again to the left and say purpose. Look at the neighbor to the right and say destiny. Sometimes we are in the process of operating in our purpose for a long time, to the point where it seems like we're not actually going to get elevated into the purpose, into the destiny, which is often called the promise. God will show us things sometimes way in advance about what He actually has for us and the things that He wants to bless us with and how He wants us to operate in complete dominion while He has us walking through our lives operating in our purpose. David, one of my favorite characters in the Bible, was a man after God's own heart. In the early part of his life, he operated in his divine purpose. And his purpose, He was a shepherd, and he was a warrior, and he was being prepared to be the king of Israel for a long time. And even as he was thrust into his destiny, he did something that changed the course of his destiny by sending Bathsheba's husband to death. And God told him he would never have peace. He would always be at war because of what he did, never fully realizing his divine destiny. Still being used in his purpose. And the destiny, I believe, that he was supposed to step into actually went to his son, Solomon. Destiny. Oh, God, how do I get to the place to step into my destiny? Certainly, if I'm being used in my purpose, how do I get to the next level? Let me first define the two words. Purpose. Purpose is the reason for something, or the reason something is done, created for, or for which something exists. The reason that something is created, or the reason that something exists. Sometimes in our everyday life, we get stuck into the routine of what we do, going to work, going to school, cooking for the family, whatever it is that you do on a regular routine, you could look at it as your purpose. My purpose is to work a job and to raise my family, or whatever your situation is. You can be in your purpose and you can find satisfaction with your purpose, but sometimes you may not actually ever step completely into your divine destiny. Definition of destiny. The events that will necessarily happen to a particular person or thing in the future. The hidden power is believed to control what happens in the future, or the fate, the hidden power, or should I say the power of God. In order to step you into your situation, into your divine destiny, God will align you to be in your purpose. And as you trust him while you're walking through your purpose, even though the purpose seems sometimes mundane, even though the purpose sometimes seems a little difficult, even though it seems like you go through a trial after trial, situation after situation, but as you trust God, God is aligning you and creating certain circumstances and events to thrust you into your divine destiny. Destiny. I know it might be a little heavy on this morning, but I promise it's going to all come together. Sometimes people that have a divine destiny and they know it young or early in their lives, sometimes the emotions and the way that they do things will require God to place you in the place of gaining humility so that you can operate in that place that he has for you. Sometimes people who are gifted spiritually or gifted intellectually or gifted even with common sense and wisdom. Sometimes in our youth we can't handle those gifts properly. So he has to place us in a place of gaining humility so that you can be set up to step into your destiny. He who humbles himself will be exalted, but he who exalts himself will be humbled. Sometimes your purpose will be the process of getting ready, the process of getting closer to God, the process of gaining humility, the process of walking through your purpose so that he can align you to step into your divine destiny. Purpose. Destiny. Go with me to Genesis 37. I'm going to start with verse 5. Genesis 37 and 5. And this is the story of Joseph. And the word reads, now Joseph had a dream. And he told it to his brothers. And they hated him even the more. You have to understand that Joseph was the favorite son of his father. And because Joseph was the son that his father had late in life, he doted on that boy. And I'm sure he could see the favor on his life, but he just loved that boy. And he showed his favoritism. He didn't try to hide it. And he gave Joseph a coat of many colors. And it made his brothers hate him even the more. Joseph, being young and immature, I believe he probably taunted his brothers with this. And he taunted his brothers with his gifts. And when he had his dream, in the dream they were in the field and binding sheaves in the field, and behold, the sheaves arose and stood upright, and indeed your sheaves stood all around, and they bowed down to my sheaf. In other words, he was telling his brothers that they would bow down to him. And his brothers took offense because they were older and they already despised him. They said, so what are you saying? That we're going to bow down to you? That you're going to reign over us? They hated him. They wanted to kill him. And then at the last minute, instead of killing him, they sold him into slavery. Purpose. Destiny. As they sold him into slavery, you all know the rest of the story, most of you. He operated in Potiphar's house, who was his master, and everything that he touched was blessed. And he ended up having complete dominion over Potiphar's house. The only thing that Potiphar really had any say-so over was what kind of food he ate. Joseph ran Potiphar's house. And as a result of the favor on his life and the anointing on his life, Potiphar's wife got after Joseph and tried to get him to sleep with her. He refused. And as punishment for being falsely accused, he ended up being in prison. Prison. Not how we think of prison nowadays, but prison. Really rough. The bowels of the earth. While he was in prison, he was still shown great favor. And in this place, I believe that Joseph was humbled even the more. I believe his spiritual gifts became even sharper. And while he was in prison, there were two people who were of Pharaoh's employ who also came to prison. God used Joseph to speak prophetically into their lives, asking the one that lived to just remember him once he got out, to tell Pharaoh of his gifts. Can you imagine knowing that you were absolutely gifted? Gifted. And God showing you prophetically the incredible destiny that awaited you. But then being sold into bondage by your brothers, and then after being sold into bondage and prospering, being thrust into prison. And then while you were thrust into prison, in the place of absolute humility, being used by God to prophesy to men who were right next to Pharaoh in their employment, and then still having to wait a couple of more years in prison. I think many people might have lost their faith in that place. I think many people might have given up on God or the fervor that they have for God. I think many people could have easily gotten stuck in their purpose because it seemed to be so uncomfortable for the way they thought it should be. Has that ever happened to any of us in here on this morning? How many people know what I'm talking about on this morning? Well, God, how can you show me something so long ago and it seems so magnificent? And God, the process of being used in my purpose seems so opposite of what it should be. And God, you've allowed me to be in a place that seems so crazy by comparison. And you drop me off in this place that feels like prison, even though it's not traditional prison for most of you. But you really are a prisoner of war. You can't go to the left, you can't go to the right, you can't go backwards, and you are only waiting to go forward. You are a prisoner, a bondservant of Jesus the Christ. How many people know what I'm talking about on this morning? And God will place you in that place of absolute and complete bondage. And he will put you there and prosper you on the outside until the only thing that you're feeling is the void on the inside. And you can't even explain it to people. Because outwardly you would look like you're blessed, more blessed than most. But on the inside, there's a hole and there's a void that makes you feel like that you've been in solitary confinement for years. How many people know what I'm talking about on this morning? Stuck between your purpose and your destiny. You can't go right, you can't go left, you certainly can't go back. All you can do is wait. Wait, I say, on the Lord. Joseph was stuck in his purpose while awaiting the alignment to step into his destiny. Go with me to chapter 40 of Genesis. Chapter 40 and verse 14. Joseph waited another couple of years after it had been used to prophesy to the servant of Pharaoh. And Pharaoh had a very troubling dream. He had a dream about some cows. Two dreams, in fact. One dream was about some fat cows, some fat, plump, healthy cows, and the other one was about some skinny, sickly-looking cows. And it troubled his soul. He did not know what it meant, didn't know what to do about it. He gathered all of the wise men and the musicians in the kingdom so someone could interpret the dream, because he knew it was something significant, but he just didn't understand what God was saying to him at that time. And when he couldn't get any satisfaction, he was saying to his servants, "What can we do?" And one of his servants remembered the man that he had been imprisoned with, who was Joseph. And he said, "Pharaoh, I remember when you sent me to prison a couple of years ago, there was a man who was extremely accurate in his prophetic gift and certainly touched by God with his wisdom. Maybe he can interpret it." So Pharaoh sent for Joseph. He sent for Joseph. He sent for Joseph. Pharaoh, who was the king of probably what was known as the free world back then. Well, not even the free world. He ruled. He was Pharaoh. Ruled almost everything. Sent for Joseph, who by comparison would be at the bottom of the totem pole. He was imprisoned. But God had aligned the circumstances. God had created just the right scenario. God had softened Pharaoh's heart to be able to receive. God had taken the years of Joseph being used and humbled in his purpose and in his perfect timing. And one move, God had thrust Joseph from his purpose completely into the manifestation of his destiny. Oh, you ought to praise him right there. Purpose. Destiny. In verse 14 of chapter 40 of the book of Genesis, it reads, and Joseph said to him, verse 14. Verse 14 of chapter 41 of Genesis. Verse 14, chapter 41 of Genesis. And the word reads, then Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they brought him quickly out of the dungeon. And he shaved and he changed his clothing and came to Pharaoh. He changed his clothes and he shaved. He changed his clothes and he shaved. In one move, in one instant, in one transformation, God brought him out of the dungeon, not only in prison, but in the dungeon, in the bowel of the earth. In one move, he elevated him to be in the presence of the king. And for some of you right now, that's exactly what he's doing. He's setting you up to change your clothes, to shave, or whatever the equivalent is, to shave off some things, to change your mindset, to be elevated in one move, in one instant. Change your mindset for what he's doing. He's blessing some of you to walk away from the dungeon to a place of your noble destiny. One instant. He came to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh said to Joseph, I've had a dream, and there's no one that can interpret it. But I've heard said that you can understand a dream and interpret it. So Pharaoh went on to tell Joseph his dream about the cows, the skinny cows and the fat cows. And he didn't understand what it meant. In verse 25, then Joseph said to Pharaoh, the dreams of Pharaoh are one. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good heads are 7 years. The dreams are one. And the 7 thin and ugly cows, which came up after them, are 7 years. And 7 empty heads, blighted by the east wind, are 7 years of famine. This is the thing which I have spoken to Pharaoh. Basically, what he was saying is, the interpretation is, you're going to have 7 years of plenty and 7 years of famine. Not only did he interpret the dream, but he was also blessed with divine wisdom on how to advise Pharaoh about what to do. Not only what the dream meant, but how he should proceed. He told him to take 1/5 of the grain from the 7 good years, basically 20% of the prosperity, and set it aside so that the 7 years of famine, they would be fine. Now, it seems pretty simple right now, but if he had not been blessed with the divine gift of the dream interpretation, he wouldn't have got it. Nobody else got it. And it was anointed by God on Joseph, who up until the day before had been in the dungeon. Purpose. Destiny. I believe had Joseph not allowed himself to be humbled in the circumstances of being imprisoned and before that being enslaved, I believe that if Joseph would have allowed himself to be angry with God or impatient with God, I believe that Joseph could have easily gotten stuck in his purpose and spent the rest of his life in prison. I believe that many of us in our Christian journey sometimes get stuck in our purpose, never realizing that in one instant God can take you out of the dungeon and elevate you to the palace. How many people know what I'm talking about on this morning? Sometimes it will look like we have been forgotten about. Sometimes, as bondservants of Jesus the Christ, it seems like our destiny is to be stuck in the pit. When really God is saying that the purpose is the process so he can elevate you to the palace. How many people know what I'm talking about on this morning? See, sometimes as Christians we can be so short-sighted where we only see from moment to moment or day to day or month to month, instead of trusting God to realize that he's got a bigger picture. Instead of trusting God no matter what the circumstances are to try to get every morsel out of every lesson, and trusting you that if he's shown you that he's blessed you with a vision for your divine destiny, all you have to do is receive the fact that the purpose is really only the process to take you from the pit into the palace. Oh, you ought to praise him right there. Pharaoh gave him the dream or the interpretation of the dream. And because I believe that Joseph had been in a place of humility for 13 years, that he become practiced in spending time with God, practice in praying to God, and practice from hearing from God. His gifts were sharper than ever because he was in the place of humility, so that when the circumstances that God had created were just right, when the situation had ripened just the way God wanted it to, when it was just perfectly done to God's taste, he was ready to step right into his divine destiny. Oh, you ought to praise him right there. I think that sometimes we think that, okay, God, I'm ready to step into the destiny, Lord. I'm ready to step into the promise. And God, if you just give me the ball, I'll show you what I can do. And we're waiting on him to do something when really he's waiting on you. If we take the time when he's got us in the holding pattern known as the purpose, if we take the time in the holding pattern that feels like the pit, it feels like the dungeon, if we take the time to persistently pursue the Prince of Peace, we will realize that our purpose is merely the process to pull us out of the pit, preparing us for the palace. How many people know? How many people know what I'm talking about on this morning? In an instant, God loves to do things miraculously. He loves to do things that will blow our minds. Joseph went on to say in verse 32, and the dream was repeated twice because the thing is established by God, and it will shortly come to pass. Twice. Many of you have had dreams and visions recently, probably at least twice. And I would imagine that the dreams were referencing your divine destiny. And if you're seeing it twice or more, it's because it's coming to pass quickly. As a matter of fact, for some of you, it's here right now. Right now. Right now. The amazing thing even further, if you look over at verse 39, because Pharaoh could have easily said, thank you very much, Joseph. You can go back to the dungeon now. He could have said, thank you very much, Joseph. I'm going to pardon your prison sentence and give you a job over here. Thank you very much, Joseph. I'm going to pardon your sentence and send you back to your homeland. He could have done any number of things. But remember, God had shown him years before what his destiny was. Verse 39 of chapter 41 of the book of Genesis says, and then Pharaoh said to Joseph, inasmuch as God has shown you all this, there is no one as discerning and as wise as you. You shall be over my house, and all my people shall be ruled according to your word. Only in regard to the throne will I be greater than you. In other words, only by title will I be above you. In every decision, Joseph, you will be running the kingdom. In everything that would be done under my kingdom, Joseph, I give you dominion. Joseph, I'm giving you my signet ring. Joseph, I'm putting you in charge of the money. I'm making you in charge of all the major decisions. Joseph, I'm elevating you to be a king. How many people know what I'm talking about on this morning? And Pharaoh said to Joseph, see, I have set you over all the land of Egypt. For many of us on this morning, God has shown us for years and decades, prophetically, and maybe not just prophetically, what your divine destiny is. For many of us, we've been going round and round in purpose to the point to where we've grown weary of the idea that the divine destiny would manifest. Or even if we think it will manifest, we don't think it's necessarily anytime soon. And even in the manifestation of the divine destiny, we sometimes find it hard to believe because we've been round and round in the purpose to realize that the God we serve is aligning everything so that in one move, in one step, in one instant, he's elevating you into the place completely of the destiny that he's promised you. So I say to you on this morning, please don't grow weary. If you feel like you've been a prisoner of war, the situation of feeling like the bondservant or the prisoner was merely to place you in the pit so that you could perceive the process as he prepares you to pass through into the purpose of stepping into your divine destiny. And as a memorial to this entire process, Joseph himself, if you go to chapter 50 of the book of Genesis, verse 24, Joseph, at the end of his life, God often leaves us a memorial so that we understand where we're going, where we've been, and where we are. Verse 24 says, and Joseph said to his brethren, I am dying, but God will surely visit you and bring you out of this land, which would be the purpose, to the land which he swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, which would be your destiny, otherwise known as your promise. So on this morning, I say congratulations as you've been processed to pass through from the pit to the palace. Congratulations for being thrust into your destiny, which is also called your promise. Give the Lord a praise on this morning.